Yes, hello. My name is Kipp Delbyck.
You need to hold it closer.
My name is Kipp Delbyck. I'm a member of the Speakers Series Committee of the Outdoor Art Club. Thank you all for coming. There are two OAC events relating to Marin Theatre's production of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, which begins on January 29. Keep it close. Oh, sorry.
And hold it straight out in front of you. Like this. No, like this. Pointing the top.
Okay, all right. There are two OAC events relating to Marin Theatre's production of Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard, which begins on January 29. Of course, today's conversation between Carey Perloff, playwright, author, theater director at ATC for almost 30 years, and who also directed Marin Theatre's successful production of Waste last season, and Lance Gardner, an actor in Waste and also in the upcoming production of Cherry Orchard, as well as Marin Theatre's executive artistic director. Also, on February 5th, there will be a wine reception at Marin Theatre before the show. There is so much more to say about Carey and Lance, but I'll let them do the talking. I have no doubt it will be a stimulating conversation. After the talk, there will be a short tour of the theater. Please meet in the lobby where you can also enjoy coffee, cookies, and tea. Please, everyone, if you would take a minute to turn off your cell phones. All right, Carey and Lance, take it away. Mine is off.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. This is so exciting to be hosting this event here at Marin Theatre. Before we dive into our conversation about the Cherry Orchard, I just wanted to give you a little update. Many of you attended the talk that I did at the Outdoor Art Club, I don't know how long ago, but a little while, last year, maybe a year and a half ago. And while it was, I hope, a very informative talk, it was a little bit bleak about the state of theater and about the state of this theater in particular. Bleak, hopefully, also inspirational. But I just wanted to give you an update and let you know that we have an incredible amount of momentum here at Marin Theatre. That in my time here, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I would usually come prepared with exact numbers because I do love data. But in my time here, we have certainly at least doubled the attendance. And while we're not back up to our subscriber numbers from before the pandemic, we are rapidly expanding our subscriber base, and I'm hopeful that within a year or two we can potentially get close to the numbers that we saw before the pandemic. We've also seen a large increase in donations, both large and small, from both new people who are new to the theater, and also excitingly, people who have decided to return to this theater and re-engage with us after several years of absence. So I'm incredibly proud and incredibly hopeful about the future of this theater. We have a lot of work to do, and hopefully this sort of engagement helps to make you feel like you are a part of the community here at Marin Theatre. And I always like to say that the community that we serve is the community that we build. So thank you for being here and building this community with us. So, as Kipp said, I am the Executive Artistic Director of Marin Theatre. I am also currently rehearsing to perform in The Cherry Orchard, which is being directed by Carey Perloff, who is the Artistic Director Emerita of ACT in San Francisco, and who has been incredibly kind to me in her collaboration and with her time, and has been incredibly inspirational and a wonderful collaborator on both this and Waste, and hopefully many future projects. So today we would like to give you a little inside look at the Cherry Orchard, hopefully expand your understanding of what I anticipate that you will all be seeing. I hope, how many people here are subscribers? Oh, fantastic. How many people?
Sign up, there's still time.
How many people already have their tickets to the Cherry Orchard? Fantastic. Okay.
This corner, we gotta persuade this.
Yeah, I think we'll persuade them today. I'm not worried about that. Fantastic. So if you haven't subscribed, it is a little bit too late for this season. We only have 2 more shows left, but you can still grab tickets to those last 2 shows, and you can be the first to know when we announce our next season coming soon. So, Carey, the Cherry Orchard is a classic of the Russian theater, written by Anton Chekhov in 1903. Before we dive into the play itself, will you talk a little bit about your understanding of the time in which it was written? Maybe a little bit of background on the serfs and the economic and political changes that were going on.
Well, we were just told that your group was founded in 1902, is that right?
Yes.
So this play was written, just imagine that, right? A year after. And what a moment. So it is a millennial play. And the turn of that century, right, the 19th century into the 20th century was monumental. Russia was such a strange place in that era, right? It's still under the Tsar, right? And it's still a kind of, compared to Western Europe, it's very unindustrialized. There are very few railroads. It's this vast country that hasn't quite yet caught up to the rest of the world. But it has been 30 years of rapid change. So in 1861, the serfs are freed by Tsar Nicholas, which is really interesting, right? So 4 years before this American Civil War. So our own history in some ways sort of parallels this question about enslaved people and the culture in which they live. The crisis when the serfs are freed is that nobody makes any provision for what's actually going to happen once they are free, right? So they're not given 40 acres and a mule, there's no training, there's no other skill set. They have all worked in quite a rudimentary way on the land. And it isn't agribusiness, big farming, it's not even plantation farming, when you think of the sugarcane or cotton or anything. It's really much smaller farmsteads than that. So the serfs that lived in these sort of communities attached to an estate probably were born there and grew up there, and that's all they ever knew. And once they were free, they didn't know where to go. Some of them go to Petersburg and Moscow and learn and become part of sort of the burgeoning Industrial Revolution. And some of them stay, as Fears does, the old servant played by Howard Swain in this play, because where else would they go? Meanwhile, the aristocrats, or the bourgeoisie who have run these estates, you have to think they're already kind of run down and under-resourced. This is not, well capitalized. And then the serfs are freed, and suddenly there's a whole group of people who have no labor to work there, anything, to even take in their crops, except the people who decide to stay. And they don't have any capital, and they live in a kind of dream world where they can see that their lives are kind of being upended. This is the winds of revolution. I know that's a cliched expression, but it's really happening in this moment in 1903. 1905 is going to be the first revolution that gets put down, but leads us towards the bigger Bolshevik revolution in 1917. So students are starting to be on the barricades, and the universities keep getting shut down because the students are making trouble. So it's a very fraught period politically, a lot of talk going on. And I would also just say it's kind of a fraught and interesting and thrilling period aesthetically, because the well-made play that led towards the end of the 19th century, right? Ibsen, Ostrovsky in the Russian context, or Strindberg, or whatever, is about to get blown out of the water by symbolism and modernism and absurdism. You're going to see all of that in this play. It's quite a radical play.
Fantastic, thank you. And so why did I choose this play? That's, that's a great question. I think that this play, in a lot of ways, does, as a sort of transitional play, let's say, contains a lot of that bridge to a more modern era of theater. I'm committed to including classics in my programming every year, because I think that looking back, also looking at pieces from international pieces from other countries, helps us better understand ourselves and our current moment. I think when we can divorce ourselves a little bit from the work that we're seeing, we don't get so caught up in judging the work in the same way as if we were seeing a play today about what was happening, in Venezuela or in the Capitol. We wouldn't be so invested in the outcome or the truths in this play. So it's very interesting to me to look at these characters individually. This is my take on this, is not the only take, but I see this play very much as a portrait of individuals. And you'll see in our marketing materials the way that the photographs were taken. They're taken as portraits, as family portraits, as individual portraits. And it's because, unlike many plays, I'd say perhaps most plays in which the story is the primary driver of the play, I really think that the characters are the drivers of this play. The story is a rather simple story of a woman, a matriarch, coming home to her estate for which she cannot pay the mortgage any longer. The estate is up for sale at auction, and she needs to make a decision that's brought to her by my character, whose father was a former serf and has worked for the family forever, but is now a businessman. Make a decision about whether to subdivide their beloved cherry orchard and build vacation homes and make more money than they could even ever spend, or to do absolutely nothing and lose it and suffer the consequences. It's a very simple premise, but the thing that makes this play so beautiful and so complex is how each of these people approaches this difficult dilemma. Now, Carey, how do you see this play? Is this to you a play fundamentally with a connection to a modern concept? Is this a play about characters? What is this play to you?
I mean, you always know, Ezra Pound once said, literature is news that stays news. And I always think, you're working on a classic when it is the gift that keeps on giving, when you never get to the bottom of it, It is enormously complicated. It is a play about loss on some level, and it's a play about the future. And I think, as Lance said, what it looks at is how individuals cope with radical change and loss, our longing for a more beautiful future, and yet our desire for things to remain exactly the same, So it's full of contradictions, and I think one of the reasons that Chekhov is such a unique playwright, and that everybody has always tried to imitate him and nobody ever has, is that the characters, you cannot judge them. So the main character, when Lyubov, whose name means love, played by the great Lislar, when she comes home, you think she's a kind of aristocratic wastrel, that she's one of the careless people, which she is. Her son, Grisha, has drowned on this property 5 years ago, and she fled because she couldn't cope with it, and she comes back and you think, what kind of woman is this? You're really ready to judge her. Bad mother, feckless lover, she has all kinds of men. And then as you watch her operate, you also think, no, she's actually also just fighting the fight of her life in the only way she knows how. This character is remarkable because to the kind of aristocrats in the play, he represents a kind of the brutality of change. And I will give you an example. So I said we were talking about doing this last year at this time. We were rehearsing Waste, and I get a text from my sister who lives in the Palisades, and her house has burned down. So I've spent a lot of time in LA over the last year, in the Palisades and in Altadena. And I don't know if you've been down there, I'm sure you've been at the site of like the Tubbs Fire or Santa Rosa, or, you know, we live in California, we've watched that kind of desolation happen after a really shocking fire. And on the one hand, that sense of terror that you're gonna lose everything, not things of literal value, but the things that put the narrative of your life together. Suddenly, when all your children's baby clothes are gone, and all your own journals, and the first albums you bought of the Beatles, none of this stuff has any value to anyone else. But when you lose it all, you have to then recreate the narrative of your life. Who am I now, right? So this is what's happened in LA, and we think, okay, but this could be a visionary moment to be a Lopatkin. What he says is, this is an incredible opportunity. People, now there's a train. People need to get away from the cities. We could build little leisure homes, and it could be like on the Russian River, and everybody could have a little cottage and be right by the river and come here for the weekend, right? This is what's happening in Altadena. So people are saying we should do real urban planning, we should build more fire-resistant housing, but build more apartments so more people can live here. We live in California, we're in a housing crisis. Guess what? All those lefty, liberal, deeply progressive Altadena people who say yes to everything until it's their own house are saying, wait a minute, what? Our neighborhood? No. We want it rebuilt exactly as it was the day of the fire. And of course, we have to empathize and understand both sides of that coin, right? So my fascination with this play, what I've been trying to do is make all sides of the argument have traction. He's not the villain of the play, and remarkably, he's sort of the most poetic character in the play. So Chekhov tricks you into thinking, oh, this is the evil businessman, and you suddenly realize he's the guy that has a real soul. That's what's so amazing about this play.
Fantastic. So this play, this translation in particular, was one that you commissioned while you were at ACT, but it was not you who directed that production. Will you tell us a little bit about Paul Schmidt's translation of Chekhov's play?
Yeah, so this is, I have this, I mean, those of you who came to ACT in the past, some of you may have, I don't know. You know, I've had this kind of mission in life. Maybe it's because I'm married to a British guy, so I think Americans should really not do British translations of foreign plays. I really feel strongly about it. I think we inherited Constance Garnett, that was the translator who did Chekhov, and for years as Americans, we sort of thought that, you know, they all talk like this and that they were kind of Laura Ashley characters. Because to our ear, Constance Garnett sounds, it is British. And the more I worked on all of these plays, the Greeks, the Russians, Brecht, the Germans, Lorca, Spanish, it doesn't matter what the culture. What I realized is we as American artists have to do these plays in our own voice. So building a great translation takes three things. It takes a knowledge of the original language. It takes a really vigorous understanding of the language that you as the audience and you as the actor are going to have in your mouths. And then it takes a way to build a bridge between those two things, right? So there's no point making it totally anachronistic because the audience, I mean totally archaic because the audience won't get it. But you don't have to have them walking around with cell phones and talking about AI. I mean, you could. They just did the Cherry Orchard in New York at St. Anne's in an Australian production, and it was all Trofimov, the student who's the radical. It was all about Elon Musk. You know, I don't think you need to do that to have an audience understand the connection for themselves. That's, as Lance said, I'm a believer that, you know, meet the audience in the middle, you don't have to land it on their heads. But Paul Schmidt, who translated this, was both a Russian scholar, Harvard PhD, like serious Russian, and an actor. and just a joy to work with. So my second year at ACT, I commissioned him to do Uncle Vanya, and we did it at the Marines Memorial. That was before we'd even rebuilt the Geary. And we had no money, and it had to all be one set like this. It was all the same exercise of how do you do a 4-act play but without a dime, but with a great play and great actors. And I loved it, and then we commissioned him to do Three Sisters, which we did do at the Geary with our company. By then we had the company again. And Anthony Fusco, whom you're gonna see as Gaev, he was Tuzenbach, the one who's madly in love with Irina and doesn't get her. And so then we commissioned him to do Cherry Orchard, and actually Barbara Damashek directed it, but he worked very closely with us on the translation. So it is an American translation. It is definitely faithful to the Russian, but when I sit in rehearsal and listen to it, like it feels completely speakable and natural coming out of these artists' mouths today in 2026. And that's very unusual and exciting.
Yeah, so often in the past when I've watched, this is the first time I've performed Chekhov. That when I've watched Chekhov being performed, it feels to me as though the actors are performing for each other. That there's a stiffness to the language that's demanding a performance, and so this has actually been a really challenging and interesting experience to let go of that idea and to allow this play to be what it feels more personal, I think, than a lot of plays. Both the language and the characters require, in my opinion, for the actors to bring more of themselves than a lot of other plays do. Not that there's not enough written there, but that it's written so truthfully to humanity that it requires you to dig deeper than you usually have to in order to build these characters in a truthful and a meaningful way. You said something funny that reminded me of a story, when you were talking about the St. Anne's production. I did a Shakespeare play once. I won't say any more about it because I don't want to disparage people, but there was a framing device around this play, and they had asked a writer to write language for the beginning and the end of the play to frame this play in a certain time and place, and we spent a week and a half with this writer who couldn't write to save his life.
And had to compete with Shakespeare.
Trying to write rhyming couplets to frame Shakespeare. Almost 2 weeks into the play, and we had barely rehearsed Shakespeare. And I said, can we just rehearse the play? I think we'll find it. I think we can trust William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So Carey, now that we are 2 weeks into rehearsal, what has been revealed to you in the rehearsal room that was not there on the page?
Well, Danny Shea, who's playing Piszczek, he said, or I think it was Danny, about 3 pages in, he said, "Oh my God, this play has just jumped the shark." And I thought, it sort of jumps the shark on every page. It is, you realize how complicated life is, and how often in drama, not in a bad way, but we sort of smooth it out in order to build some kind of arc that gets you where you think you are going. This play, so it's filled with people like ourselves who all think they're the hero of their own movie. You know what I mean? I have a cartoon above my desk that says, "I do think your problems are real, Howard, they're just not very interesting." And I always think about that because we all think that we are the most, our problems matter the most, our insights matter the most. They all feel that way, and they have moments where they confess something deeply personal, and the other person isn't listening at all. And usually in drama, I'll give you an example because I'm still wrestling with it, and I had an idea about it last night. The play starts with him asleep because they've been waiting up all night for Lubov to come home, and this fabulous, crazy servant, Dunyasha, running around saying, "I'm gonna faint, I'm gonna faint, I'm gonna faint." And then he wakes up when he hears the train whistle, and he starts to give a monologue about his memory of this woman who's coming home. In any other play, if you were directing this and it was any other writer, Shaw, Shakespeare, whatever, they would face each other, and I would sit and listen, and you would tell me your memory of her. And we tried that, and it doesn't work, because she's not interested, really. She's so excited, and she's living in her own world. But if she totally doesn't pay attention and does some other activity like powdering her nose, then we stop listening to him. So it's like this juggling act that sometimes she listens, but sometimes she's waiting, and she has to keep her own energy alive. And where does he stop talking to her and start talking, maybe, to the audience? So it is a play where I think it has the potential to break the fourth wall, you know what I mean by that, what we call, and because if nobody else is listening, you talk to whoever paid the ticket, you know what I mean? You guys are listening. We're gonna use the aisles a lot. Carlotta, played by Leontine, is a character who walks around going, I don't even know who I am. I don't have a birth certificate. Where did I come from? Maybe my parents weren't even married. And some of that, I think, is right to the audience who's sitting there having the same question. Who is that character? So one aha I had is, I love Beckett a lot, and I've directed a lot of Beckett. There is a lot of Godot in this play. I mean, even simple things like jokes about the boots. The whole last act is everybody's walking around trying to put on a pair of boots, and the boots don't fit anybody. In this case, it's galoshes, but I mean, that's Beckett, that's the beginning of Godot. Or somebody's standing there and they don't know what else to do, so they take a cucumber out of their pocket and they just start to eat the cucumber. That's the top of Act 2 of this play. So you can never get too reverent because something crazy happens, like it really does in life. So that has been really interesting to me. And the other thing I realized is you have to be more specific than in almost any other play because it changes at every moment. So I've driven them a little crazy at times, but when it's a monologue, it can't just run, you know, like an aria. Things shift and change, and people change their minds about things all the time. It's also very physical. So it's a play about sex. I discovered the first week I thought, this is a play about women who want to have sex and men who are scared of having sex. That's sort of a reduction, but it's kind of true. The men are all in love with Lubov, and she's like their mother, so the idea of having sex with anybody else is impossible, but it's not going to be with her. So the men have to talk a lot, because they're not going to get it, you know, get it on. That's one thing I learned.
Yeah, the specificity is incredible. This is a play that doesn't give you, I don't think it gives you a lot of answers. Right?
Yeah.
It leaves a lot of open questions for the actors and directors in the room. You think, well, why am I doing this? Why is this happening? The answers aren't laid out for you, but it's very clear that you have to be specific in what you're doing. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So there is a lot of Beckett. There's also a lot of Shakespeare.
Yeah,
Yeah. So one of the things I think is so interesting is how much Shakespeare the Russians had at that time.
Or at least thought they had, but misquoted all the time.
Sure.
It's mostly misquoted Shakespeare.
In this play, no, but I mean Chekhov and those, and
saw a lot of theater.
in that time, an enormous amount of the theater that they had was was imported, translated, Shakespeare.
Very little Russian literature at that point.
Yeah, so I find it very interesting to find this play sort of not, it's not this other thing. It's very much at the confluence of all these literary rivers that have brought us to today. It's not a purely Russian extraction. It's very English in its origins, and then it's the same. All of the literature of that time was. So, Carey, I'm interested, just moving on a little bit from the play, and we'll get back to the play, but I'm, in my career, I spent many years as an individual artist, as an actor, and I'm now leading this theater and working as an actor and director also, while running an organization. I wonder, for you, what are the differences are there any differences in how you approach work or or how you do the work now versus when you were at ACT? Does it affect?
It's so much easier not to be running the theater. I mean, what I realize is, because I watch Lance with just so much empathy, because it is a monumental task to keep an institution alive. I mean, now is particularly challenging, but you know, when I came to ACT, the Geary lay in ruins, and we had to raise tens of millions of dollars and rebuild the theater, and then the school was in crisis, and then this, and then that, and then, I mean, so, you know, my memories of all the times, I usually did 2 shows, directed 2 shows a year, and in a way, the directing was my guilty pleasure, and I always made sure I directed at the studio on the furthest floor from my office so they wouldn't come find me. But, you know, every break is just triage, right? Every break I was watching 10 minutes of a student scene so they would think that I was invested in the MFA program, and then I was signing off on a marketing release, and then I was talking to a donor, and then I was triaging some unhappy staff person who'd had a fight with their boss. And so I have to say, it has been an incredible joy over the last 5 years to just go across the country and direct in all these different theaters. Partly because your mind can stay full of the thing you're working on without it getting just pulled in a million different directions. You get good at multitasking, but it is really a gift to be able to kind of focus on one thing. And the other thing is that when it's someone else's theater, you are there to serve that vision. Right? So the great thing about working for Lance is he knows why he chose this play and where he wants the theater to go. And so we can all serve that. It's harder to be at a theater that's kind of random, you know, but I've just chosen to do the stuff I wanted to do since I left ACT. So like I've been doing Tom Stoppard's last play now, Leopoldstadt, very gorgeous play about the Holocaust and his Jewish roots in Vienna, and that's my family history. And so that was big immersion for me, and it was with Loretta Greco, you may remember, who ran the Magic. She runs the Huntington now. So again, I knew why Loretta had chosen that play, why it was important for her in her second season at the Huntington to make a statement by doing this big, ambitious, complicated, nuanced Jewish play. And so I could support her vision, you know? And that's really gratifying. When you've done it all by yourself, I love having that opportunity to say, where are you going? How can I plug into that? Particularly in this community, because this is a community I really care about. And so together we grabbed this company of actors that is some of my favorite people from 25 years ago were students of mine and people who we did Waste together with. So it is sort of like having company, which is something I really believe in.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So you mentioned Tom Stoppard's last play. This was Anton Chekhov's final play.
Yeah.
Anton Chekhov was not a prolific playwright. Very few plays. Perhaps a prolific writer, but not a prolific playwright. I'm curious to know how you think. So he had tuberculosis. He battled tuberculosis for 20 years. He knew that he was coming to the end of his life. I wonder if you think that knowledge, the idea that this could be his last play, had an effect or worked its way into this play or other plays of his, because there was no guarantee that he could have lived.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I feel it. You know, Chekhov was a doctor. I don't know if you know that, but he was a physician. And I think the thing he valued more than anything else was the ability of a human being to pay attention to another human being, just to pay attention. And that the crisis of the cherry orchard, it's a group of people, they're not evil, but they just stopped paying attention. That's how this little boy died. It's like Murder on the Orient Express. They were all there to look after him. There was a nanny and a tutor and a mother and a sister and a stepsister and an uncle, and they lived by a river and nobody noticed. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like as Chekhov was dying, thank you, Fiona, that need not to pass judgment, not to make a big last stand, but to say, as you know your days are numbered, pay attention to every little thing. Pay attention to that sunset. Pay attention to beauty. Where is there beauty? He says he planted a bunch of seeds to have a poppy crop because he wanted to make money off the seeds. But in the midst of it all, when the field bloomed, what beauty. And so that, I think, is what Chekhov was aware of as he was dying, is just the beauty of the world coupled with the cruelty of it, and that both things had to be noticed.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about the poppies and this idea that that my character Lopakin sees the usefulness in things and also the inevitability of things. You plant a crop of poppies, they're beautiful when they flower. You can sell those seeds for a lot of money. They're gonna die anyway.
Yeah.
Right? You oughta.
But
Yeah.
at the moment they bloom,
God, they're beautiful.
it's transcendent, and we should see.
And you can recognize that, and that sort of parallels this idea that that there's an inevitability to the sale of the home. The home is up for auction. The family will not be in possession of this home,
Right.
regardless of who buys it. They're not going to raise enough money to buy it. It's clear from the very beginning that that's the case. So why not create something out of nothing and ensure that there's progress at the end of this inevitable.
And yet here we are, we're talking to a garden club. I mean, I don't know if you literally, like, that's part of what you all do. Yes.
No.
So,
No.
it is what you do.
Some people, yeah.
Some of you. So, nature to Chekhov was incredibly important. And I don't know if you know Uncle Vanya, his play Uncle Vanya, but that's one of the first great plays about climate change and about human destruction of our planet. And Astroff was the doctor. Ours was Wendell Pierce, of all people, was so brilliant. He gives this speech to a woman he's in love with, and of course she's like, la 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 la, and pays no attention, about the terrible effect, like of cutting the Amazon rainforest down, but it's about the forests. So it's really profound that Chekhov saw and recognized this. The cherry orchard is slightly different. It's really interesting. It's deeply painful to the family that this glorious, vast orchard that has white blossoms, is going to get cut down. But it was built, it's not natural. It was built to be a commercial crop. And it's not yielding cherries anymore. And if it is, they've forgotten how to dry them and make jam and do all those things. And so it's not quite the same thing. And yet, maybe for you all, because of where you sit in the world and what you do, you will understand the pain for Lyubov of the idea that those trees are going to be cut down, how painful that is.
And I did, on the first day of rehearsal, I spoke about, I was an EMT, I quit acting a while ago, and because I felt like I wasn't connected to the real world, and I for about 3 years I worked on an ambulance, because that felt like the real world. And I went to a woman's home in San Jose, and her home was on an orange orchard. She had a home, and her sister also had a separate home. This, many acres of orange orchard, right in the middle of San Jose, right near tech companies, right near huge housing developments, and they refused to sell. They wouldn't let go of it. And so, in choosing this play, I think very much, not just about the big ideas, but also of our own history in the Bay Area. Silicon Valley used to be called the Valley of the Heart's Delight. And when my grandparents moved to San Jose in the early 1960s with my mother and her siblings, their house was set among orchards. And I hear the stories of how my mom and her siblings had to walk through orchards to get to school every day. And slowly, over the years, they cut down those orchards, and they built houses, and they cut down those orchards, and they built houses, and my family had to sell their house, long after the orchards were gone. Eventually sold the house to cover the medical costs of sick family members. And every now and then I go on Zillow and I look at the house because my grandfather buried a time capsule in the backyard of that house. I'm waiting for it to go up on Zillow, and then I'm gonna rent it. Hopefully, I can't buy it. I'm gonna rent it. I'm gonna tear up the backyard. But this is not, theater for me is not. It's not fiction. It is fiction, but there are fundamental human truths that exist on stage, and I don't take it lightly. And as we enter, or we are now in this era of AI and and new truth and all of these things, the theater is now and maybe in the future really the only place where you can trust what you see. Even if we're telling you a story, we're putting on a story. It's true. There's a truth to the humanity of it. You can see the people with your own eyes. You're hearing the voices coming directly from their mouths. And there's something that's so important to me in creating theater about connecting that idea of truth, of humanity, with the other people in the room.
I think the other thing you'll recognize about our own moment is the sort of strange, maybe this is always true, alienation of young people from their parents and grandparents. So the characters in Cherry Orchard do not make it easy for the next generation to understand what their future is going to be, right? They hold on to the past with an iron grip and they romanticize the past, but they haven't really parented those children or given them any skill set to kind of get out there in the world. And they're hoarding the resources, but they also need to because they don't have any other way to live. And the children, by the same token, this may sound familiar to you, about your children or grandchildren, never stop talking about, we need change, I'm an activist, I need to do this. And then as Chekhov said, they talk all night and they're too tired the next morning to do anything, right? So I find it reassuringly familiar that the situation in which we find ourselves today, in which there is so much millennial and Gen Z alienation, and what is the matter with these kids, and why is there such a schism between generations, that is very much something that is part of the comedy of the play, but it's also the heartbreak. That was in Chekhov's mind for sure.
Well, before we get to some questions here, Carey, is there anything in the play that you think that people should keep an eye out for when they come to see it, or anything that you would like them to keep in mind?
Necessity is the mother of invention. So this is a play with 4 distinct sets and a theater that can afford 1 set. So that is a great challenge. And Nina Ball, who's the set designer, and I have worked really hard on this, and it's actually a great thing that it can't be literal. So just watch and see what you discover. It is a sort of poetic frame. I will tell you there are a lot of dolls. So the first act takes place in a nursery, and it's the nursery where Lubov, the adult woman, grew up. I grew up with dolls. I love dolls. I'm sort of obsessed with dolls. I love the playwright Annie Baker, and her plays are all full of dolls. So before we even started in this, I asked the production team to just, anytime they went on eBay and saw a cheap lot of dolls, just to buy them. So we have a lot of dolls. And that's sort of the history of the house. But the frame on stage is sort of like a doll's house that has walls, but you can light through them and suddenly you're inside and outside. You remember if you ever played dolls, it didn't matter. You just put your hand in and then you were inside and then you were outside. So it's all that world. And as the play goes along, the set sort of becomes more and more and more exposed. And that's been, we don't know yet how it'll work till we light it and get on it, but that's been a really interesting challenge to figure out how to design this in a poetic way that feels resonant, but that doesn't require us to, either build 300 19th century costumes or a literal set.
Yeah, and I think it's so exciting that you get to be in here and see this space in in its raw state, in transition. This is, theater is so much about creating a specific environment. Yeah, it's creating a specific world. And in between shows, the set comes down, and sometimes I look at it and I go, how can we ever build something that's going to make sense again? It's almost unimaginable that we can raise these worlds out of nothing. Actually, Fiona, would you mind getting the model from the rehearsal room so that on the way out people can see it in the context of the theater? Thank you. So we will take some questions from you all, and then following that, we'll do a brief tour of the space, and we'll probably break up into 2 or 3 groups to do that, because there's so many of you, which is wonderful. Yes?
Could you say more about when you said it's really important to be specific? I'm not sure if that's a term of art in theater or what that means as an audience member. What am I looking for?
Sure, that's a great question. I'll repeat all the questions. The question was what does it mean to be specific when I was talking about the need to be specific. It's so interesting. I'm not sure how to even answer that because it's sort of intrinsic to my, I hate the word process, but process.
It's things like this. So we just staged the 3rd act, and he comes back and tells them the auction has happened and the orchard has been sold. You can't have a general reaction of the other 10 people on stage, because each character has their own, his or her own specific feelings about him as a character, about the orchard, about their history there. So what I was working on today, and it feels very painstaking, is like, where does this person go at that moment? What is the reaction at that moment? Specifically, what do you feel about that, as opposed to, because I think you will see as an audience member, you can't color in this play with a broad brush. If your eye glances to a character in the corner who hasn't said anything the whole act, something specific should be going on. Life should be being lived, not just when they're speaking, but when they're living. Does that make sense?
And the choices that we make in the real world always have something underlying them, whether it's conscious or unconscious. There's always a reason that we're speaking the words that we're speaking and the way that we're speaking them, the actions that we take. And there's a danger in acting of not putting anything behind your actions, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And so you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're only speaking words or just standing there, because that's not what people do. Or if you do that, maybe something else is seeping in from your own life. It's not useful for the scene. Yes.
So I have a sort of quick question for you, Carey, before I ask my real question. Did you just do something in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah.
What?
That was Leopoldstadt also.
Oh,
So we started Leopoldstadt in Boston, and then we took it to the Shakespeare Theater in D.C.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that question was what did you just do in Washington?
Yeah.
So my question is about your character, Lance, and so you're kind of the nouveau riche guy that can afford to buy this. How did you make your money? And the reason why I'm curious is because Russia was kind of behind France and England at that time, and even though they freed the serfs in 1860, whatever, it was still very much the haves and have-nots.
Yep.
So you're very unusual that you made all that money, you can buy this. So how'd you do that?
Yeah, great question. It's not specified in the play. What we do know is that there's certainly a connection to land, land ownership. There's certainly a connection to agriculture. So I think that it's an interesting window, of course, of capitalist expansion in this country before the communist revolution. So I think that people like Lopakin, and so something also that's interesting that we didn't touch on that we haven't actually spoken about because it's not necessarily relevant to the play, but I think it's very interesting, is that unlike the United States and the emancipation in the United States, when the serfs were emancipated, nobody looked different, right? There was not a racial divide, no obvious markers other than other than wealth. And so upward mobility, I won't say it was easier, but it was certainly different.
Yeah.
So I think that Lopakin is just a person who understood a changing world and was able to capitalize on the opportunities that were presented. And I imagine that in a situation like that there's a ton of money to be made. You know, any time that you can get in on the ground floor and figure out how to do it early on, that's where you make the money, and then everybody else.
It's a boom period of building and industrialization and railroads, and there's a very funny moment in the play where British speculators come and pay off somebody on their land to get the minerals underneath. So all this stuff we're going through with Putin and Ukraine and rare earths, it's all there. It's who's going to grab it and exploit it. He is also, by the way, the only character in the play who actually knows how to do a day's work. They talk about work a lot, but he actually works. It's remarkable. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I have questions about poppies. So one is when you pull the seeds from a poppy, does it kill it? I was trying to follow the analogy about how it's going to go bad for this woman no matter what. She's going to lose her home no matter what. And so if you pull the seeds from a poppy, does it die earlier? And then, I know that's a garden question, but and then the second one is with poppies, and he's going to be able to, is it a heroin thing at the time? Opium.
I don't know the answer to either of those questions. So for those who didn't hear, when you this is the only time you'll ever hear me admit this. Once a year, I'll let you know if I'm honest. The question was when you get the seeds from a poppy flower, does it shorten the life of the flower? That's number one. And number two, was it related to opium production?
Okay, gardeners, who can answer that? Who can answer the poppy question?
Well, we used to have opium poppies by accident.
Oh, sure.
But, but what a young neighbor showed me is that after the flower's gone, you make incisions in the what's left down the side of it, and the opium kind of oozes out. Oh. And you scrape off the opium and do whatever you do with opium.
But opium poppies are a specific kind of poppy, right?
It's a red poppy.
Yeah, so I will say as a caveat that my analogies aren't necessarily based
I think
in
he wants the seeds.
Yeah, there's a reference to the seeds.
He's harvesting the seeds.
Harvesting the seeds. For my analogy, I was just suggesting that the flower will not flower forever, and that's the important
But
part
it's
of that.
not a bad analogy. I mean, when we were doing 1,000 Splendid Suns, the Khaled Hosseini thing at ACT, that's about Afghanistan, right? And so we did a lot of research, and obviously that is like the center of of poppies. And Khaled Hosseini said, I just made me think of that although they knew, Afghan people knew that crop was destroying their country, when you traveled on a train in rural Afghanistan and you saw those poppy fields blooming, it was the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. But it was an agent of death. So the analogy's not terrible.
Yeah. So we don't have, again, like I said, this play is full of specific mysteries, right? There are references to things that we can't answer with the words that are given to us.
Yeah.
Do you think this is the same era of time as Fiddler on the Roof was with the anaesthetic removal?
A little earlier, but yes.
This is earlier than.
Yes, well, not earlier, obviously, this was written way earlier, but
Yeah.
Sholem Aleichem was very much in Chekhov's consciousness, and there's a very moving story as Chekhov was dying. This is about Chekhov and the Jews, which I've done a lot of research on because I'm so curious. He writes about Jews a lot, and we know that anti-Semitism was virulent in Russia, and that the pogroms that drove the first generation of American Jews here in the early 19th century was already happening very regularly. But I didn't know this, so Sholem Aleichem wrote to Chekhov and said, after particularly virulent pogrom near Vilnius, would Chekhov write a story to sell, to benefit the reconstruction there? And Chekhov was too sick and said, but I can't write a story. Take anything I've written, and you can have anything, and sell it. And may this benefit your people. And in this play, there's a Jewish orchestra. In Ivanov, he marries a Jewish wife. So the Jews are very present in this world, which is interesting.
All right, do we have, yes?
I have a question kind of about the linguistics and thinking more about the translation between an American translation of Russian versus a British translation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could talk a little bit.
I mean, okay, this is gonna sound really dismissive, and I don't mean it to be because it was a beautiful production, but did you see Uncle Vanya at Berkeley Rep? Anybody see Vanya? So that was a British translation with the lead actor who was British, right? So the behavior and the language, when you hear somebody saying sod it, or I can't even think of another, examples of just expletives or whatever that are uniquely English.
Mind the gap.
Yes, exactly. I mean, we are, as I always say, it's hilarious, but we are two countries divided by a common language. We use metaphor differently, we use irony very differently. The English are much more ironic, naturally ironic than we are. Tom Stoppard always said Americans were missing the irony key on their keyboard because we're so earnest. You know, we believe in therapy and confession, and we tell the truth. The British never believed in any of that. But so they're slightly more ironic, but they're also much more class-based. And so in that Vanya, for instance, it was just full of locutions that are not things we would use. And I always think language is destiny. We are what we say. And so when we, as Americans, are asked to use a locution that hasn't come into our lexicon, it can be delicious, but it makes you stop for a minute. Do you know what I mean? You think, what? And I don't want these characters to feel any more foreign than they need to feel. In other words, yes, it's Russian. And now we have to play it as ourselves. We're not doing the play in Russian. It's not authentic that way. So I want the behavior to feel authentic. Whereas if I'm doing Pinter, or Waste Indeed, it was very important that we worked with a vocal coach and we really did it British. Because the world view, like it made Lance stand up in a different way, to have to speak that way. And we all had to absorb that and think about the masking that happens with British English. Do you know what I mean? The sidelong thing that happens, it's very different. But I have watched Chekhov a lot in Russian, and I don't speak Russian. My father was a Russian Jew, but of 2 generations. So we didn't have Russian in my family, but I've gone to Russia a lot. It is a language that has a sort of extra vowel sound. It is the most expressive language. And it is really true that they can laugh 1 second and cry the next. They are very loud people. Olympia Dukakis, whom I loved, always said, they're Greek! They scream all the time. Well, they don't have to scream all the time, but they're not British aristocrats. And that's what I think is important to remember when I say it's not Laura Ashley. We don't behave that way. And we never had an aristocratic class. We had plantations in the South, but we didn't have that. And so we shouldn't try to lay that on a Russian play. Does that make sense? Yeah.
We have time for one more question if there is one. If not, we'll wrap it up. Going once,
Last thought?
going twice.
Please come.
Yeah, so please, if you do not have tickets, they are still available, and we would love to see you at the theater. This is the second to last play of the season. I'll just tell you briefly. The final play of the season is a play called Pictures from Home, which is a really interesting play that's based on a book, a sort of an autobiographical photo book by a not a playwright, what do you call him? A photographer, Larry Sultan, who was a resident of Green Bay and who taught in San Francisco, taught photography, and it's a really interesting play with a local spin to it, and that'll be directed by John Moscone, former artistic director of California Shakespeare Theater. So, thank you so much for joining us. We will meet in the lobby and break into a couple groups for tours. On your way out, please just come by and take a look at this. This is the model of the set, and you can sort of see how that's already coming to life a little bit here. If you can't stick around for the tour, that's okay too.
And the drawings are all over there.
Yeah, and we'll they can't come on stage, but we'll see some drawings in the rehearsal room when we go in there for the tour. All right, thank you so much.